Okay, in tutorial one on how to render a plan in Photoshop using the Cintiq tablets, we went through the process of setting up all the layers. So we kind of pre-configured everything so we're ready to go. And as I mentioned in that tutorial, the next step we want to do is actually create a color scheme for our plan rendering. And this does two things. One, it allows us to look at the color scheme, really look at how the colors work together, where the areas of contrast are, how we can group things together to really make the eye move through the rendering the way it should, and allows us to make color adjustments at a stage where we just have a basic fill color for each element in the plan. Secondly, we can use those base colors, and as you see in a second, the layers that we set up in the first tutorial, we're going to go through and use those base colors, those base layers to fill the colors in. So we're already partway done rendering once we do that. Then we'll go through and actually add the shading and the textures and the details and everything else. So this tutorial won't get into how to do that. It will just talk about, and I'll go through and demonstrate how you use a couple different selection techniques, and we'll have to add a few lines in here and there, but there's really just a handful of techniques that you're already familiar with from working on the photo montage projects, and I'm just going to show you how it applies to plan drawings. And part of this process is really understanding how you move back and forth between layers. We'll use the black and white drawing layers to create selections, but we will always fill the colors on the color layers down below. It's one thing I can't emphasize enough. If you start filling colors on these layers up here, then you're going to have a problem. You have to make sure that we fill these colors down here. In fact, maybe what I'll do is go ahead and just lock these layers. Hopefully we'll be able to keep selecting those without actually filling on. That'll keep us from making any changes to them. Okay, so one of the methods we learned in terms of making selections was with the magic wand. Now, if you have an area like this, if I use the magic wand and I have it set to all layers, I can start clicking inside here and it will give me these selections that kind of go around everything. And because there's an inner line on the tree, if we zoom in on that a little bit, you can see it doesn't actually go all the way out to the edge. It stops at that inner line. So, you know, that could work a little bit, but it's really not that useful because it doesn't give us, and then of course, when we move over to these, what we get is all these spaces, and we don't want to have to go through. What we want to do is get the whole outline of every tree or tree massing, fill it with a color, and then we've got our color scheme completed, and every part of the drawing has color placed on it. So the best way to do this is to still use the magic wand, but to actually go into the black and white drawing layer. And so in this case, I'm going to select large trees. I will deselect what I just did. And what I want to do is make sure that the tolerance is set very low. Some of these drawings or these edges have very kind of light colors. I think I used the #2 pencil brush, and with pressure sensitivity, it kind of gives you that kind of light gray that fades in and out a bit. I want to make sure it doesn't bleed out into the other parts or inside the tree symbols, which wouldn't be good. So I want to make sure the tolerance is down, say at 2, anti-alias is checked, contiguous is checked. That means it will only select areas that are connected. I don't want to select the white inside the trees. Again, I want to select the area outside, and as you see, what we're going to do is instead of trying to select inside, we're going to select outside and then inverse that selection. So now we have a selection around the outside borders of everything on here. In order to do that, I have to uncheck sample all layers, because if I have it on sample all layers, it'll pick up everything you see here, and that's not what I want. So uncheck sample all layers, select the layer that you want to select. In this case, I'll start with large trees and work my way down. Get the magic wand. I will just set this on replace right now and click anywhere outside the trees. Now, if I put my quick mask mode on, you can see the selection now is everywhere outside the boundary of the trees on that layer. So if I go to select and I inverse that, check quick mask again, now you can see I have just the trees themselves selected, and that's exactly what I want. So I go back to regular selection mode, close this up, go to color, plants, large trees, base, and next I'm going to select the color, and I'm going to start on this color scheme. I'm going to make sure everything is pretty light, and maybe I'll shift a little more towards the yellow green there, kind of a celery color. Click OK, and the couple ways we can do this. we can select the paint bucket tool, use that and click in there. We can go to edit, fill, and use foreground color and fill it that way. Or really the quickest way is to use the keyboard shortcut, and that's simply by pressing the Alt key down and backspace. The Alt and backspace fills a selection or a layer with the foreground color, and Control backspace fills the selection or the layer with the background color. In this case, we want the foreground, so we use the Alt key. And I'll repeat that as we go through these so you make sure you get the sequence there. And when you fill it, because it's on the color layers below, you can see that the lines of the trees are still showing through. It's not covered up. All the line work is still visible, and that's exactly the way it should be. So I'm done with that one. I'll close that, open this one, go back to my black and white layers, choose ornamental trees, magic wand. My settings are still the same. Click outside, inverse, check it. I've got all this medium or ornamental trees. I'm going to select another color. I'm just going to shift around a little bit, a little more into the kind of pure green, and again, keep that pretty light. I'll deal with the value contrast later. Alt, backspace. Oops, sorry, didn't like that. Go down to layers. Now, that's exactly why I locked this. So I did what I told you shouldn't do. So, and right now I selected the wrong ornamental trees layer. Fortunately, I had it locked, it wouldn't let me fill it. So again, what I usually do is close this layer, come back down here, medium trees, that's what I'm using for the ornamental, Alt, backspace, and there they go. Then I'm going to, you can use the select menu to deselect, but if you remember, that's a Control D, that's a good shortcut to remember. So deselect that, close this, evergreen trees, base layer, and then go back up to black and white, evergreen trees, click outside, inverse that selection, check it if you want, there you go, everything's selected, close this, come back down to the base layer, and we do the Alt backspace, but first we need to pick our color, and again I'm sliding over a little more into the blue-green for the evergreens, and you can see, so maybe I'll push that a little bit up there, a little bit lighter, and Alt backspace and fill that. So again, I'll come back, maybe that's not quite enough contrast in there, but we can come back and make that adjustment. I'm going to use my Control D shortcut to deselect that. Go back to my layers, close that one, large shrubs, base layer, come back up here, large shrubs, click outside, inverse, I'll check it just to show that that's what I've selected. Close this, come back down to large shrubs, pick my color. In this case, I'm going to stay with a green, medium green, and maybe I'm going to reduce the chroma of that a little bit, and then do my Alt backspace, and got that filled in. Back to my layers, close that one, open small shrubs, go back to my black and white drawing layers, go to small shrubs, click, inverse, close that one, go down to my base here, and I think in this case I'm going to actually pick kind of a lavender color that's a complementary accent, and I can shift that a little bit later on, but I'm as a principle, I'm going to use a little bit of a different color there because this pool area is kind of the key feature of this community center, the pool and the dock. And the dock will have boats and the watercolor, so I need something to kind of pull the eye into that centerpiece there. Okay, so that's basically all the trees. You can see how quickly we went through and filled that in. Now, the other parts of this work a little bit differently. I would say the other elements that maybe relate to that are the cars, and I think I know from past experience that if we go to black and white, transportation, cars, If I use the magic wand here and click, what you'll notice is for some reason they're selecting big areas around the cars. I guess that's something I didn't clean up. So what I'm going to do is click outside of there, click in here, and then just hit delete. Click out here, click next to the car, delete. Close this for a second. So I'm just going around to each of these and see if I can take that kind of halo of, it must be a super light value or something, because I've actually tried to figure out what that is by messing with the colors, and it's not working. Okay, why isn't this, oh, okay. So if I want to change that, what I do have to do is go back up here and unlock that, because right now I can't delete anything on that layer. Okay, so I got to unlock. Let's do that again. Select. Well, let's just do them all. Okay, add, outside, 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 outside. Just click right beside each one of these vehicles. This one's kind of in 2, 3 pieces. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I got the car itself. If I get that, it's not going to help me. All right, let's do these and hit delete. And we'll start this one, this one, this one. And around this one. Now it should work that if I did my job, you can see it's wrapped around all these except for this one. So I missed that one. Delete. Okay, now when I click outside the cars, that's working pretty much the same. I can go to select and inverse. Let's go back to my layers, down to my color. Close this up. We're in the color layer group, transportation, cars. And since the cars are going to be kind of different colors, I'll probably pick something that's a little, maybe I'll just pick an orange for that and just make them all the same. So again, Alt backspace. Now, when I want to go through and actually finish these cars, I'm going to go through and make them different ones. But if you remember from the montage, we could come in here and lock the transparent pixels on that layer. And then I can grab my paintbrush, see what I have, hard round, and let's make my brush size a little bigger, a lot bigger, something like that. Then I can come in here and say, okay, I want a dark blue car over here. I can paint that in. I want a light yellow one over here. Paint that in. Another yellow one over here. I want a gray one down here. So it makes it really easy to go in and change the colors of those cars to make them stand out a little bit more. Maybe that's a little too bright. So as long as the transparent pixels are locked, I can paint over those really quickly. So I filled them with one color initially. You could even fill them with a neutral gray if you wanted to, which actually might be a good idea, just because they're going to be special accents that come into the end, and I don't really want them to influence how I see the color composition with everything else in here. Okay, so just fill them with a neutral gray, and we'll go back and add colors to those really quickly using the pen later on. All right, so I think, and the boat will kind of do the same thing. We'll deal with that a little bit later. The rest of these areas are kind of a little bit different, and in order to select those, we need to do a couple things. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off my color layers for right now. And I'm going to go and turn the texture layers off. And I think under plantings, I actually have grass, the ground cover texture. I'm going to turn that off. And so, and then I'm going to turn all the plantings off and transportation. Because what I really want to see here is all the ground plane elements. And I put a layer in here, I think, for this purpose in the ground plane called border. And that's an empty layer. And what I want to do with that is I'm going to pick a black color. And I'm going to use my line tool, and I'm going to make sure this is set in pixels. 2 pixels wide, that's good. And what I'm going to do is draw a line with the shift key down and just go right across these areas, lining up with the edge of this grayscale. Click, shift, drag, and then I'm going to zoom in on this over here. I need to make sure that that's connected, and it looks like it is. It can be over, that's okay. It's just, if there's a gap there, my filling is going to move outside the boundary. So now that I've kind of closed off that end, I can just use my magic wand. And in this case, I can go down, well, I'm not gonna, let's turn off the plants because I can end the transportation. I can actually go down to my ground cover planting beds layer and use the magic wand. In this case, I will check sample all layers because since I have this showing, I can click in there, 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 there. And now you can see that I just selected basically everything. Now, there's a couple little spots that I'm missing here, and you can tell that because there's a little bit of sparkle. So probably here, set this up. Try that again. There's some light gray areas on one of those layers, and so it's missing those spots. And really what I wanted to do is fill in all the way around there. Okay, so that's basically the area that's going to have the ground cover that kind of runs along underneath everything. So I'm going to go to planting beds, and again I will pick a darker kind of maybe middle green color for this. And all these colors in the color wheel are kind of high chroma, so I am going to reduce that chroma down and then do my Alt backspace, although I will double check again. I'm in the color group, ground cover, planting beds, Alt backspace, there we go. So I've got that filled in. I can deselect that. And then the other area that I had, and this one is a little hard to see, so I'll put my textures on. It's in the plantings. So I may have to go ahead and turn these off and leave the ground cover off and the grasses on. So you can kind of see the area that has the grasses in it. So probably the easiest thing to do with that is just to make a selection using your pen and the lasso tool. So I'm going to come kind of through here. And I'm not really worried about where else it's showing up because there are trees over top of that. So I'm just going to come up right through here. And because I can fix this later, I can erase it, clean it up a little bit, not too worried about it. So I'm going to close that group, marsh grass, pick a little more of a yellow green, I think. In fact, I'll probably start here and then adjust that a little bit more to the green, a little bit like that. Double check my layer. Yes, I'm on marsh grass, Alt backspace. There we go. And like I said, I wasn't very careful with that. So since I'm on that layer now, I can get my rectangular selection marquee, select down here, just hit backspace, start here, select over, backspace, clean that up. So sometimes this attractive approach works just fine. So don't worry about if you go over a little bit. And I can do the same thing now for my buildings and my pool and my paving. Now, one of the things that I mentioned before is, let's go back down to our border layer. I get my brush tool, and maybe I go with a 2-pixel brush, go with a black color, zoom in a little bit. There's actually supposed to be a line between here and here, so that this is road and this is pool paving. And then I think this pool paving, let's just say it goes all the way up to here. So that wasn't real good, so I'll try that again. There we go, a little better. So I'm drawing a couple extra lines in there to make sure that when I use the magic wand, everything stays where it's supposed to. All right, so that's going to work pretty well. All right, now I'm going to turn those couple color layers off, ground cover off, and plantings off. Okay, so under ground cover, done with that, I've got hard surfaces. So dock and decking, well, let's just do pool paving first. In this case, I can make a selection, but I could also just use the paint bucket. So that's in this row. If you see the gradient tool, paint bucket. So I'm going to choose a paint bucket, swatches. I am going to pick a light, well, this is the decking, right? So I'm going to pick kind of a light orange, tone that down a bit, kind of a little tan for the wood. And I can just come in here as long as I'm on the correct layer. Pool paving, let's go to dock and decking. Oopsies, that didn't work very well. I have to make sure I check contiguous and all layers. Now I can just click and fill in these areas. Now, because what I'm doing here, it is kind of going around these lines, and probably for what I'm doing, that's not a big deal, but I could also just switch back to my paintbrush. Let's make that a little bit bigger. And just come in here and quickly paint over that. Okay, paint over this. Just make sure that that's actually filled in. These steps didn't get selected, so a little easier and faster just to come in and do that. Okay, so I've got that color filled in. Pool paving, same thing. I'm going to pick up my paint bucket. I'll select a different color. Now maybe this one I'm going to go with more of a light gray. I'm not sure what that's going to be. Click in there. There you go. Have that in the pool paving. Roads. For roads, although I know everyone thinks asphalt is black and therefore it should be dark. Asphalt in an aerial photo, actually, because there's a lot of reflectivity and there's aggregate in there that reflects light, it actually ends up being fairly light. So if I want to get some contrast between here and here, maybe what I'm going to do is go back to my red and get a very faint kind of warm color, still fairly light, but now I'm going to go to pool paving and change that. That way the pool paving is separated from the deck, but it's also separated from the roadway, which is a good thing. All right, and then the last things it looks like we have to do in here, if we our plants back on, our ground cover back in there. We've really got the buildings and transportation. We can see that in there. Hard surfaces. And again, don't worry if this is really light. I think that is the best way to do it. So let's come in here. We could do the water next. Got two water. Now the pool, simple enough. Let's get a watercolor and maybe start with that kind of light blue. Just click in there. And for the river, on the ground plane layer, there's this layer here. It says it's layer 5, but we could call that Kiowa River tone. That's the grayscale tone that you can see over on the left as I'm turning that off and on. Okay, because that has a solid color, all I need to do is control click on that and it will make that selection. I can close this up, go to Kiowa River, and for now let's use the same color. So I'll just alt click on that. Now once you fill that, for future clarity, let's go ahead and turn this off because the grayscale is going to change the way the color looks and I don't really need to see that anymore. It's like some of the other textures. Once I fill this in the next tutorial, number 3, you'll see how we fill this in. Okay, so basically we've got everything done except the buildings, and we go to the decks. So maybe I'll hold the Alt key down, pick up this color, and let's get rid of our selection. Click here, here, here. Again, I'll have to paint that in by hand. Click all these larger areas. And then let's switch over to our paintbrush. Zoom in a little bit. Let's make this a little smaller. that in. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect everywhere. If you go over a little bit, it's okay. If I got space, just pick that over there. You can any selections that didn't go over the lines there. That's one of the things about using the paint bucket. It doesn't quite cover. So you don't really want to have any white color gaps. I'd rather see, I can come in with the eraser. We're on a separate layer. I can just erase that. All right, let's zoom out. Sorry, let's go back over to here. I think that's it. That looks pretty good. And then we can go to the roof. And light side, let's pick something that's maybe a little more in the yellow range. We'll warm that up a bit, but still keep it pretty light. And go back to my paint bucket. Light side, there, 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 there. Now these top pieces are slightly different, so I was going to do light, 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 and light. Now, when I'm going to create the shaded version of this, instead of trying to pick another color, I already have a hue selected. So I'm going to tap on my color chip and just slide down within that same hue. And then I can come in here and anything that's not colored. And again, this set kind of has the same issue a little bit, that it's not really filling over. So if I wanted to really make that look better, I'd come in here with my paintbrush once I have that done. And at least these lines that are kind of going through there, fill them in, because I want to be able to see that. I don't want that to look kind of faded. I really want to see that black line kind of showing up in there. That wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm going to come in there, just catch that edge, just catch that edge. Okay, and we can come back and do some other adjustments. I'm not going to take the time now to make everything perfect, but you get the idea. We do want to see those black lines, so just come right up along there, and same thing with this one, maybe come right along there. Okay, so that's the buildings, and I think that's pretty much everything we have in here. So let's go to color, turn on the plants, turn on the transportation. Let's go back up here, turn all this back on. I think under plantings, I had turned these off individually. So if you did your job right, this is what it should look like. And you can see all the dark lines are still visible. And the colors are there. And the idea that we're looking for here is, when you look at this, you should see groups of things. The buildings should pop out as a group of buildings. The decking should be an entity. Within the plants, you should see 1, 2, 3 types of major plants, and then 2 types of smaller plants. So we're trying to get this grouping so your eye sees that and it picks that up. Now, a couple places like this, right now, this is kind of coming over the deck, and that shouldn't be. So the reason for that is under hard surfaces, we've got dock and decking. Okay, and then up here we've got our ground cover layer. So what I need to do is move that ground color layer down below, and now that's going to cover that up. And this should look the same way. The large trees should cover the medium trees and the evergreens, and the medium trees should cover the bottom of the evergreen trees. So that's just a matter of shifting these layers to make sure that works. So that's the basic process of taking this first pass. And next time we'll look at textures, and we'll talk a little bit more about making a color adjustments. If you really decide that there's not enough contrast with these medium plants here, you can go to the medium trees, pick the base, choose image, adjustments, and hue saturation, and then you can start shifting this hue around. If I shift it that way, it's getting to look a lot like them. If I shift it too far this way, it looks like the evergreens. So maybe I keep it in that middle range, and maybe I just make them a little darker, adjust the saturation down. And you can look at it, so I preview, that's what it was, that's what it is. So maybe I get a little more value contrast in there, just make them slightly darker. and that starts looking a little stronger. Or I go to the evergreens, say, well, maybe that would be a little better if I shifted that a little more toward the blue. So again, preview off, there's what it was, that's what it is now. So we can make those kind of color adjustments to make sure things really stand out. Down here on the ground cover layer under marsh grass, you can see this is kind of sticking out here a bit, so I'm just going to go with my eraser and erase that out. Any place you see, a line that needs cleaned up, you can go through and take care of that. But the stacking order should take care of most of it. So that's the process we're going through. Create that initial color composition, fill all the base layers in your color layer group, and in the next tutorial we'll go on to talk about how you start adding shading and textures.